Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting in the Healdsburg tasting room of Idlewild Wines with Sam Bilbro, owner and winemaker. Sam, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us a little bit about Idlewild.
Thanks so much for having me, Allison. So Idlewild is a Piedmontese-focused brand that I started in 2012, assuming I was creating an expensive hobby, because who's going to buy Arnase and Dolcetto and whatnot from California? And 11 years later now, I'm still just trying to figure out how to keep up.
Yeah, obviously pretty popular and delicious wines. So now you're tasting room's in Healdsburg. Where are you sourcing your fruit from? And talk about, vineyards you own and what you manage and where they are.
So starting back to 2012, was sourced from a vineyard called Fox Hill in central Mendocino County, where there were plantings that ranged back to the early 90s. Of these Piedmontese varietals plus many other Italian grapes. By 2014, I was managing Fox Hill and overseeing the overall operation. And then in 2018, started sourcing after grafting to my own property now, which is in Yorkville Highlands, called Lost Hills Ranch. High elevation, less than 20 miles from the ocean, schist and quartz and sandstone, old lifted seabed sandstone soils. And then in the last few years, I've developed a new property hired by a wonderful client of mine who has a 70-acre vineyard, and we've now grafted, 50 of the 70 acres, and now there are 46 different varieties, mostly Italian, spread across 70 acres. Complete experimental vineyard, but beautiful, and with some things like Timorasso and Pella Verga and Nascetta that are the first in the U.S.
Wow. I mean, you can barely find Nascetta in Piedmont, and now it's here. That's pretty exciting. So what is your total case production?
For Idlewild, I generally am somewhere in the 6,000 to 8,000 case range. It's a hard question to answer based off of having had COVID and then drought years all at once. But, that's the range, and that's kind of a happy place where I can keep production extremely hands-on, but also make enough to, especially with our blends, satisfy the thirst, I guess you would say, that's out there.
And so for the thirst that's out there, what markets are you in?
Idlewild is distributed in, give or take, 20 states and 3 different export countries. But predominantly, the 2 big ones are New York and California, which is pretty standard. But we do have several others that do really well for us, like Illinois and Ohio and Minnesota, and some that are a little off the normal beaten track, but that do great.
Wow. Italian grapes from California in the Midwest. I love it. So I know that you grew up in this industry. You are not a first generation, but I'm wondering, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
First memory relevant to wine has to be asking my dad when I was, who founded and ran Marietta Cellars, and he would have us sit down and taste blends with him. So it was sitting and tasting a blend with him when he was putting together his old vine red, kind of the house wine that he made. It's actually a tie between sitting down and tasting a blend with him when I was probably 5 and asking him why did he want me to taste it, and his answer was, because you're 5 and you'll be honest. Or just getting to go and walk in vineyards with him and hang out in the cellar. I mean, that was our time with him, and so I just grew up doing that, and that felt like very, very normal.
Huh. So as you got older and became more of a wine drinker and more interested in it, what would you say is one of the most memorable wines you drank, and what was that occasion?
I mean, the most memorable story is, I think, realizing why I loved wine. For me, I loved childhood with my dad and my brothers. Loved having Italian sausage and homemade Italian sausage and tomato sauce and gardens and cellars and vineyards and all the rest. That was in blue collar vineyards at that, which meant we were actually out there sweating and working with our dad. That was wonderful, but I sure as hell was like, see you later. I'm not going to do that. That's way too much work. Because I never quite had the same connection. I didn't know it for me. And so, I think the memorable wine in the end I don't even know who the producer was. I never tracked it down. It was the first time a sales rep, when I was in the restaurant industry, poured me a Barbaresco. I was just working at the bar, and I got to sit on tastings and had a Barbaresco, and suddenly lights flashed and everything made sense, and that's why this whole Piedmontese journey. There have been plenty of other bottles along the way, but that one single taste changed the course for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I've been up visiting at your property, and I know you describe it as finding your Alps up there. So I know it's a pretty special place. If we come into your home, what kind of wines would we find in your cellar? Is it all Italian, or do you have a smattering of other things?
It completely shifts and always shifts. The only consistent thing is generally Italian, a good amount of Italian, but that's not to say there won't be Champagne or Burgundy or a Rhone in the little wine fridge. But I don't actually. The only thing that I would say I ever buy and really plan to hold on to is Nebula-based wines. Mm-hmm. The rest I'll find, and I don't buy that many, to be honest. I love places like Chambers Street in New York, where you can buy a wine that's aged and delicious, and I don't have to be the one who's being patient.
Right. So basically, you don't have a lot of wine in storage because you drink it all. So is there a particular wine you drank recently in the last couple days that really stood out, and what was it?
It's a funny time for you to ask that, because I've actually been taking a little break from drinking as much wine. I've been trying to remember that a good balance in this industry is also key to keeping a great palate, and so it's a funny time to answer that in that way. But I was, let me think really quick. That's a good question. Actually, just yesterday, we had a importer who, we have our wine shop next door to the Idlewild tasting room. The wine shop's called Ciao Bruto. We do mostly all Italian imports, some other import wines as well. And tons of fun for us because it's the outlet to explore the things we love to explore and then share that with everyone, and it gives great context to why we do what we do at Idlewild. And one of my favorite import books is naturally called The Piedmont Guy. And The Piedmont Guy represents just amazing, hard-to-find Piedmontese producers. And they brought in a new, to their book, producer from Caluso, down at the base of the Alps in northern Piedmont, Alto Piemonte. And the producer was called Giacometti Bruno, I believe, and it was perhaps the best Herbluce I've ever had, and all of us were kind of just shocked and floored. Oh. So talking about getting into the geeky little corner of the world, but that's the stuff we love and get excited about.
Well, I'm curious about something. You're working with a lot of different grapes, all from northern Italy, from Piedmont region. You grew up in the wine industry. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No. I think there are perfect. I don't even know if there's a perfect wine for a perfect moment. I think there are certain things that are great from certain places. There are certain things that pair certainly well, but at the end of the day, what someone loves and makes them smile, which is completely subjective and separate to the person, is what matters more than the rest of it. There's no basis past that. I've always said we can get as fancy as we want, but at the same time, if someone loves Cabernet and likes to eat fish, who gives a shit? That's what they should do.
Absolutely. Well, so it is a subjective thing. So I'm curious, what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
That's a loaded question. I've always felt like critics and scores were a great basis point, a great place to learn from. But I always really encourage people to use that as exactly that, as a basis point. I think relying on another person for something that is subjective eventually leads to not doing the work yourself to keep learning. And even now, I will, anytime I'm going on Chambers Street's website to buy an older bottle because I'm excited to have for a special occasion, I will look on Jancis Robinson's or Antonio Galloni's website for a vintage chart and read their reviews. I do love to look at those just out of curiosity, but past that, I think it's more important for people to take that curiosity into their own hands and go explore.
Yeah. So as a wine drinker, quick answer, red, white, or rosé?
All.
Still or sparkling?
Both.
Okay, it's pretty easy. I know a good wine drinker drinks everything. So you make a variety of wines, and you were talking a little bit about, how there isn't a perfect, things work together, especially when it comes to food and wine. How do you approach food and wine pairing? Are there rules you follow, or are there certain tips you can share, or is it sort of a come what may?
It's certainly come what may, but then there are just things that work, and I think that comes from, again, back to curiosity and having the love of that exact interaction of food and wine. That's what I love so much in the Italian side of food and wine is this kind of beautiful bit of like the food sometimes has some sort of pushed edge, like call it spice in southern Italy, or a little, forward rich, salumi fat, or a little bit of briny sea funk from something like Batarga. And then there's wines that have the opposite edge or, counterpoint edge that actually make that become more whole. Mm-hmm. That's the basis, and one for me that I love is that clean bitterness that is so commonly found in Italian whites or lighter, crunchier Italian reds, where it's just acid driven, but there's a clean bitterness. Mm-hmm. And then you can have things that are like cleanly bitter, like arugula and radicchio salads, or the hard to pair with vegetables like artichokes and asparagus. I love where those kind of complementary pieces fit together and become better.
Huh. I've never really thought about that, but the bitterness of the wine with the bitter foods, because everyone always says, well, if you're going to have asparagus, you have to have Gruner. But let's go any Italian white. I like that. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I mean, I'm biased, but I think the wines are damn good.
I'll vouch for that.
No, I think whether it's my wines or wines like mine from California, if you're not trying, people are exploring the spectrum of what can be had here, I think you're missing out on the fact that wine is diverse. Wine is a huge spectrum. I love Pinot Noir and I love Chardonnay, but and I love Cabernet, but why do we have so much of our acreage planted to so few grapes? I think that's a disservice to the greater history and culture of wine. I think wineries like mine and friends who do similar things really are the ones helping to show that the spectrum is where there's just more to be had. And I think I've used the word a few times, but that word curiosity, like mm-hmm. the joy of the search is so much more fun than and you can still have all the comforts of an old favorite even with its new variety, and that's really interesting to me.
So if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with?
I mean, on one hand, there's got to be make a sparkling wine, a whole series of blends called Flora and Fauna, and one of them is sparkling, and you always want to greet with sparkling in many ways. That's a great move.
That's what you greeted me with.
Yes, true. On the other hand, I mean, aliens are kind of weird maybe, and so I might choose like the weirdest out there wine I make that doesn't have a lot of context for fun, like something like, bone dry, and this is new, not yet released, but bone dry still Brichetto that is like light red and flowers in a glass, and that way maybe it just is something they don't know of any context, so it'd be fun to play with things like that too.
Wow, my God, like you just speak my language. So you're working with unique varieties for this region. I mean, people are not as familiar with it the way they are with other grapes. And we know, 2023 is an anomaly in a way because we've gotten so much rain. It's pre-harvest, so I think you're in pretty good shape. But I'm curious, aside from the atmospheric storms of late, do you see more variation from vintage to vintage, or more commonality, or is it small variation or grandiose?
Interesting question. I think that what we're seeing is not necessarily where I look at that, and where I'm approaching that is not so much as what are we seeing with the years, but it's proving the point of what I think I've already been doing with Idlewild and many other producers, so I don't want to take any credit because it's common, but not nearly common enough. Are you farming for soil health? Are you planting varieties that have some level of drought tolerance? Are you planting varieties or grafting varieties in places where they naturally should exist? If you do those things, you don't see the variations. They don't show as much. If you're making sure that there's organic matter in your soil and you are helping the vines to have deep roots, they are more resilient. Mm-hmm. And if you're not planting Chardonnay in a desert landscape where it's going to thirsty variety in a thirsty zone, you don't get affected by the drought as much. I think we're proving the point that smart farming and planting less for marketing reasons, but more for what works from a environmental perspective will yield over the long term better wines and less variation that we don't want to see.
So are there any signs or predictors that you look for at any given time in the season and will kind of tell you what a vintage is going to give you?
Interesting again, because 2023 is a great example. We've seen more water than we've seen in years, and years, which is honestly very wonderful. There's zero concern because we need it, period. But sure, that's going to lead to a certain type of spring where there's should be more explosive green growth with humid conditions, so there's more mildew pressure. But none of that really means anything until we get to the point of fruit set, because it's all elastic. And so it really depends on what still happens in front of us. We just are starting to, in a season like this, have some perception of what's coming, but we don't know until it happens, and then we don't know until that unfolds. Once we get to fruit set, we're in a less elastic timeline of the year, where it's more regulated just by total days and degree. So the only thing that will then affect us is having some massive heat wave that comes, or having an extremely long length of cold weather, let's say in midsummer. Those are all pretty zone to zone naturally going to happen. Yeah. So it's elastic. It's not formed. There's too many variables to say that we can predict it. I think it goes back to the prior question. Are you farming to have a healthy site and healthy soil? Then there will be less effects that you then have to worry about from there.
Yeah, and I can see what you mean, that you can't really look ahead and predict because anything can happen at any time. It rained yesterday and you could have a heat spike tomorrow. You just don't know until it happens. But I'm curious if you've established since you can't predict the weather, have you established any rituals that you like to do at the beginning of harvest, at the end of harvest, throughout harvest, anything with your team or just you yourself?
I wouldn't say rituals. That's an interesting question again. I think that I hope, and I think that we've developed a team here with whether it's the people we contract with in vineyards or the cellar team, which is really just me and one more Mike, plus interns at Harvest. I think the hope is that we're all just living in the moments. There's less of this ritualistic thing of like marking the days. Like each day is great. We live in a beautiful area. We do something we love. To me, there's no difference between the day that bud break happens or the day that we're at harvest. It's all a wonderful time, and to live in that moment is more interesting, I think, than marking rituals.
So since you live in that moment and you're living in your vineyards and spending all this time, we always hear about winemakers that talk to their wine or play music to it. And I'm curious, walking through your vines, what sort of communication do you have with your vines? Do you talk to them? Do you have to criticize them at times or encourage them? Or is it not quite as much like I talk to my vines?
I want to make some dumb joke like I whisper sweet things to them in the dusk. No.
And they listen. They're in love.
Exactly. No, I think at the end of the day, as much as I have a completely romantic side to me, I also have a very logical side to me, and I think coming to things with romanticism and then being really pragmatic leads to really good decision making. And so I'm not out there talking to the vines. I'm more spending time with them, so to speak, so I can see what their location feels like. And that goes back to then making sure that you're, in my case, grafting, not planting, but because we've done that in several vineyards now, grafting varieties that make sense in specific locations.
So you have healthy soils. You're following everything. You're following a very, practical, sustainable, organic model in the vineyard. When it comes to the grapes coming into the winery, do you think you have to talk to them at that point in the barrel? Is there music that you play, or is there any sort of communication with the wine itself?
less verbal. We play a lot of music, and it's always different. I think there is something to be said about, whether it's in the vineyard or the winery, a happy environment where there is a joyous feeling and a feeling of life. In the end, we are interconnected, whether it's people to people or organisms to organisms, and creating a happy, healthy place does lead to things working. And so I think it's more about creating that environment through, turning the music up and having a good time, making sure that you stop to have a nice lunch in the middle of harvest and smile and celebrate those, whether or not it's because the fermenting yeasts, or the yeasts that are doing the fermentation, are directly impacted, or we're then in a happier place, so we do our work a little bit better. Something there happens, and I think that's more the piece. So we've talked all about wine and you as a winemaker, but I'm going to jump off that topic a little bit more about you as a person. And I'm curious, you said that, you grew up in the wine industry, you grew up in the vineyard with your dad, but wine hadn't grabbed you. So what did you want to, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up? Well, as a little boy, I don't really know. I don't have a direct recollection. I mean, at that point, I was pretty much, even as a little kid, my dad was one of my best friends, and he called me his little clone, and we were really tight, and similar to my brothers, we all were. And so we spent a lot of time in that way. So in one hand, it's not funny that I'm back doing similar things to what he did, but I never really saw it as like, that's what I want to do. It's just, it was more live a life like he lived. And then when I got to college, I worked several different jobs, and I had 4 different majors, and then I dropped out because I was having more fun playing in a crappy punk band and working at dive bars. So, it was never linear, and I don't think I ever landed on one thing. I think that does maybe go back to your prior question about, like, I brought up being romantic. Like, that's where the romanticism comes in, is falling in love with something. So I never had really fallen in love with something enough to want to do it until this. And you said you were in a crappy punk band, but do you have a favorite singer or group today? Are they punk? I have many, many favorites, but one of the bands that I often go back to and probably have listened to the longest overall is The Clash. The Clash. And if you could have The Clash come here and taste your wine, which of your wines would you want to share with them? That's funny. I think I'd probably go to the corner store and get some really cheap beer because that seems more their speed. But if it were one of the wines, I'd probably pour something kind of, something like maybe the Herbalucci like we're drinking right now. A little something different, a little something fun, a little something playful. Okay. So when you're not working, how do you spend your free time? I have 2 wonderful kids who are 12 and 11, and I spend every minute I can with them. And the nights they're with their mom, I tend to try to cook and relax and rest because I'm pretty busy between all those other fronts. And I'm curious, when you're planning a romantic evening, what sort of wines make for that romantic evening? What to you sets a mood and will make that whole evening just on another level? God, I guess I'm not good at this part of it. I mean, that's maybe why I'm still half-time a single guy. But no, I don't. I love wine. I love all of this we're talking about. But again, I don't think of wine that way. It's more of a direct connection for me. I would say more important than wine would be setting. If you want a romantic night, cook something homemade and delicious and go sit out in the beautiful setting in the middle of nowhere. That's romantic. Or go have an awesome experience, like call your first date going to hike up a mountain. That's more interesting than I think this. It's funny, I love making wine. We're talking about this thing that I do as a business, and I'm going to say something almost anti that. But, at the end of the day, it's a beverage in a bottle. And if what you have close by, it's the moment that matters. If what you have close by is the ingredients for a gin and tonic, have it. Great. I think this edifice we put on wine is sometimes actually its downfall, where it becomes, this bottle is so special, it has weight before you even open it. to me, that almost detracts from the joy of what it really is, which is something to enhance the moment you're actually in.
So, separate from wine, a question, we won't talk about wine now, but I'm curious, when you look back at your, your life and your career, I mean, a lot of people give us advice over the years, and I'm sure your dad gave you a lot of advice both as a father and as a winemaker. And I'm curious, is there a piece of advice he gave you, or perhaps it was someone else, that you carry with you through your life and how you choose to approach life or approach work?
I think actually what comes to my mind maybe is my brother Jake. I remember getting into high school. He's 6 years older than me. He's off to college, and he and I were really close as kids, as I was with my older brother Scott. Two older brothers. They fought like hell. I was close with both of them. But I remember Jake saying something along the lines of, "Don't have a cool card and just be who you are. Don't try to go be one of the cool kids, because that won't make you happy." And I think that I've always done that. I never cared about being in the mainstream, and I think, looking at what I do for work here is definitely going against the grain in a lot of ways, but or playing in a punk band rather than playing in a pop band. Like it just do what makes you feel alive. That sentiment is what came through from Jake.
Who's actually, I have had him on Wine Soundtrack in the past. So I think it's kind of interesting. I think that's great advice and something that everyone should follow, but I think there's a sort of irony in it, because you are one of the cool kids now with the grapes that you do and the style of the wines that you make. So, without even trying, you've become one of the cool kids. I'm curious, when you look back at your life, and your children cannot be the answer, but what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date? I know your children.
No. Actually, to be honest, I think your children are things you love, but I don't actually think of them as being something I should be proud of. I mean, I'm proud of them for who they are, but
yeah.
I think that's a funny thing people always answer. Like, I'm certainly very proud of the fact that Idlewild has gotten to where it is, but I think those things are easy in the end of the day. I'm proud of the fact that my brothers and I went through losing our dad and stayed with him, and he died in my arms, and we got to give him the send-off he deserved, and with a ton of love around him. That's a hard thing to do. I'm more proud of something like that than the rest. I'm more proud of the fact that, my kid's mom and I have become close friends and can be joyous in a situation we didn't think we were going to be in when we got divorced. And on the same time, I'm proud of putting skis on my feet and climbing up a mountain and then skiing down it. Like, those things matter more.
Mm-hmm. So we're sitting at a table now, and we have a few of your bottles on the table. And I'm curious, there's an empty seat next to you. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, would you like to be sharing a bottle with? Introducing them to Idlewild.
Well, he had Idlewild before he died, but my dad.
Yeah.
He's the number one person. I would love to have a chance to just have another glass of wine with him, or just get on the phone and talk to him.
So I want you to complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
Meat without salt.
You've done a great job. We're almost done. So, you're talking about when we spoke earlier, and you talked about how if you're good to your soil and your environment, and you're watching everything for your grapes, that they will thrive no matter, sort of what climatic issues come about. So I'm curious how you look at climate change, and you think we'll be drinking wine and making wine in 300 years or 500 years?
I am, in the end, I'm an internal I'm an optimist in the end. I'm blanking on the word I was going to say. Eternal optimist. And we've created something very scary as humans. Something I don't think we know what's going to look like in the future. But I also do trust that if people as a whole, and if society as a whole chooses to do what it takes, we're full of ingenuity and we have so much capability. I just read the other day about someone who invented a way to basically filter carbon out of the air and turn it into sodium bicarbonate, which can then be put back into soil and water.
Wow.
There are mushrooms that can digest and break down hydrocarbons and all sorts of offshoots of gas products and oil. We have the capability. So yeah, we should, if we're not drinking wine in 300 years, we've certainly screwed up. That's, I guess, how I see it.
So on the off chance that you had to go to a deserted island because, world was ending, what 3 wines would you want to take with you?
Good question again. I would probably say I'm going to alter your question and turn one of them into a gin and tonic, because gin and tonics taste good in the sun. I would then, don't have a specific, but I would absolutely have a either a delicious like weighted white like a or a sparkling like a champagne or a chablis, something in that camp. I don't really care what it is specifically. And then of course I'd have some wine made from the Nebbiolo grape in the red format.
Fair enough. So it's time to play our little game, and then we're all finished. And that's pairing wine with music. So this is a way, wine makes you feel a certain way. Music makes you feel a certain way. So I want you to kind of pair some of your wines with music. So we started with your sparkling Flora and Fauna, which is a blend. Well, tell us about that wine.
Sure. It's a non-vintage blend of basically early picked rosé material, mostly, from a couple different vintages, then blended together of Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, Barbera. And then instead of adding sugar and yeast to create the secondary fermentation and bottle, I used fermenting Arnase the following year and added at a rate that would get me to the desired pressure. And so that's technically called the method ancestral. And yeah.
And what music would you listen to?
That wine's pretty fun. I have a side of me that loves some old, really like fun pop and even poppy like soul and Motown. What comes to mind? It might not be the song, but something like "I Want You Back" from Jackson 5. Just have a good time. Okay.
And we've been sipping the Erbeluce, the 2022 Erbeluce.
Well, I did mention that I maybe poured this one for the Clash if they came through, so let's just go to my favorite song by them and say Straight to Hell by the Clash. Okay.
Let's see, you said that you're going to be coming out with Timoroso.
That wine is still becoming what it is, so it's hard to answer. It's like prescribing the genre to someone who's still just learning how to listen.
Well, then we'll move on to something you have. One of my favorites of yours is your Grignolino.
Grignolino's pretty fun and playful with its kind of really forward floral fruit, but then it's also got some structure behind it. So I might want to, play it something that's got a little bit of pop, but also has like a pretty strong baseline. What would that be? That's the question. Actually, like maybe I can't think of a particular song, but maybe something by someone like LCD Sound System.
Okay. And then we'll do one more, and that's, of course, Nebbiolo, because that is the end all be all. And I know not every Nebbiolo is the same, so let's focus on your Nebbiolo.
I think Nebbiolo puts me in a different place than the rest of it does, as much as like there's a side of Nebbiolo that is very much a band like the Clash to me, because it's like the gritty edges and all of the thoughtfulness. So it goes to bands like that, but that's not where I feel when I'm drinking it. Nebbiolo is almost this like sweet, sad, melancholic wine in a way that I love. It's gorgeous, but it's like it's brooding. So it makes me think of someone like Gregory Alan Isakov, some really great like kind of pretty folk, or maybe even someone like Bon Iver. I think that's where I'd go.
Wow, your descriptor of Nebbiolo is just gorgeous. So, Sam, you have survived and you have been wonderful. I have 2 final questions. It's a 2-part question. So, the first question is, where in the world, what wine region is the top of your bucket list to come visit? Or to go visit?
So twofold. It's always Piedmont, because I always want to go for more and I want to go to every piece I haven't seen. But outside of that, I really, really want to get up on Etna. I have not seen Sicily at all. So Sicily is an entire island and province, but specifically to climb up the mountain and be on Etna.
Mm-hmm. And the last question is, if people want to come and visit you, how can they find you? Where can they find you? And what will they find?
So the most appropriate ways, if you're visiting wine country, is to come to the tasting room. You will find one of the things I love that we do is we don't have this ceremonious tiny plate of 3 pieces of prosciutto and a fermented blueberry to serve with our wines. We have a big mounting plate of the best prosciutto left from the only closed circuit farm to make prosciutto off their own property in Italy. And so get a great product, tell you exactly what it is with all the details, and then give a generous serving of it, and then put it next to wines that it loves to be near. I love that. That's how we do what we do. So that's why to come to the tasting room. But if you aren't lucky enough to come to wine country in California and do that, then lots of retailers have the wines. There's a website. There's lots of ways to get to us. Just, if nothing else, send an email to info@Idlewild Wines and find us.
Fantastic. So if you come to Healdsburg when you need a break from Pinot and Chard, which are beautiful, and you should never need a break from it, but right off the square is the tasting room here. You will have a special treat. I'm excited to go taste wine. Sam, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack. I hope you had fun.
I did, and thank you, Allison.
Well, cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.